Hello and welcome to Everything End of Life with me, Jason Cottrell, and guests. And today I have Maria Bailey, who is a grief resolution specialist. I had to just check that I got that right. So, hello, Maria. How are
Hello,
you?
Jason. Good. And yes, I'm very well, thank you.
Excellent.
Just
So, grief resolution specialist, there's a journey that brought you to this particular point in life, I'm guessing.
yes.
Would you care to kind of kick off whereabouts this journey started?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's one of those things that you do. You don't wake up one morning and say, I'm going to help people with grief and loss. You kind of get there and arrive and
Yeah.
find the next thing you're helping people. So my background is in public relations. I spent my career working in PR agencies, setting up my own agency, and then after having two more children, I ended up working for a grief training organisation, Grief UK, doing their in-house PR and marketing. And so as part of that, I ended up training as a grief specialist, just to understand the process more than anything.
Yeah.
But during that time, my stepdad died in 2016, so the work had a bit more meaning. And then in 2020, I think we were all hit by grief and loss with COVID. And my dad lived in America. The day before we went into national lockdown, he died of cancer, and we didn't have the opportunity to say goodbye properly. I had to do it over the phone, and we didn't have.
That's a familiar story for many people, isn't it?
It is.
Of years.
And then sort of halfway through 2020, my mum then got diagnosed with terminal lung cancer. And by the end of the year, she'd gone. So this work became very, very important to me. And the chance to help people and, so that they weren't living a life of pain, that became my raison d'etre, if you like.
So your compassion, because I think we all have an innate sense of compassion about us. I think from kids, we learn, I think, compassion because as kids we can be very selfish, and then we grow up, and the way we work is to help each other, and therefore it's innate that we become compassionate to some degree. But I think grief and loss specifically really helps to bring that out, and that seems to have been the case for you. I just want to go back for a second, if we may. How many children have you got?
I've got three.
3 children.
3 children.
And how old are they?
An adult child now. He's 20, and I've got a 10-year-old and an 8-year-old.
So we've got a 18-year-old who's just left home, and Sarah, she's brilliant, and she's got a fantastic little job up in London doing something or other, which I'd never understand, and a 15-year-old. So those years of bringing up the kids, I guess, coincided with your journey. So was that a difficult thing? I mean, can I be personal and ask you, a single parent? Are you a parent?
No, I'm married. So yeah, it was hard work. My husband works away a lot of the time, so I was on my own doing this as well, parenting, juggling. In 2020, dealing with a dying parent as well.
Gosh.
Really young children, and a child doing his GCSEs, and so at that time. So yes, it was hard work.
But any parent will know that the GCSE era is fraught with problems for the teenager and the parent, I think.
Yeah. Well, I'm very lucky with him. He's very much a get on with it kind of person, and he's doing his degree at the moment. He's always been very motivated with his learning, so he wasn't a bother at all, to be honest. He just got on with it, and it was that year when they didn't actually sit the exams. They had what were called centre assessed grades. So he didn't actually sit his GCSEs, which was very strange. So his A levels were the first formal exams he'd sat 2 years later, and
I think that a lot of kids during the COVID era just had a really strange time, especially at university, when they went to university and didn't go to university. So, that was a kind of peculiar thing. I have a cat passing me. Sorry.
Right.
She's deaf, so you can't tell her off or anything, So.
So I've got 2 dogs sat by my feet. So
Oh, bless. Yeah, we've got 2 dogs in the other room.
Hopefully it'll be quiet.
So what are they, your dogs?
I've got a Weimaraner and I've got an English pointer.
An English pointer. Oh, great.
Yes, I don't do things by halves.
No, I was going to say, yes. Well, we've got a collie husky cross called Holly and a cocker spaniel called Ivy the gardener. So we've got Holly and Ivy. We call her the gardener because she's just ripped up the entire garden since being a puppy, What can you do? So that's the way you got to get to here. So you trained as a grief counsellor, but you've moved on from that, or that was a part of the journey.
So that's a part of the journey. Yeah. So in 2021, Grief UK closed. The training organisation was run out of America, and they decided to take everything back to America. So all of a sudden, I had no job, but I was also very passionate about the work, and I didn't want to stop working in that sector. So I got together with Matt, who did the digital marketing for Grief UK, and we set up Grief Specialists so that we were still helping people. And actually, Grief Specialists is a social enterprise, which means it's not for profit. And we've set up a resource online, griefspecialist.org, with lots of articles about different types of griefs and losses, myth busting, things like Time's a Great Healer, things that are unhelpful for grievers to hear. So we try and share as much as we can to help people. And
that's a really important thing, the myth busting thing.
Very much so, because until you're in the situation, you just don't know. You just don't know what these unhelpful things are that we are ingrained in us as a society, like Time's a Healer, be brave, don't cry.
It's almost like telling somebody who's really wound up just to calm down.
And grieve alone, and you'll start to feel better after a year. Things that are ingrained in us as a society, and just taking those.
And then we want to help, don't we?
Yes, yeah. You feel like you're helping when you say these things, or 5 stages of grief, which were actually written for people who were dying. So I'm yet to meet a griever who's in denial about their loss, that somebody's died. Yes, sometimes it doesn't feel real, but it's not a denial. So it's just taking away those unhelpful elements of grief. And then on top of that, we've got a directory of grief specialists around the country who work in different modalities. So you've got counsellors, we've got psychotherapists, we've got grief recovery method specialists, we've got edutherapy, grief resolution specialists. We've got people who do Reiki, grief yoga. So
that's a bank of people you've got out there.
It really is.
To call on.
Exactly. And I think from working in this space, I've realised that one size doesn't fit all when it comes to grief. There's not one solution. There's many. And giving people that option of what's out there and finding the best method of help for themselves, I think we've done a good job in covering that, I feel. And all our grief specialists pay a very small amount every month, like the equivalent of 2 coffees, but it goes in our funding pot. So the idea is we have a pot of funding so that if anybody wants immediate grief support but find that they financially can't afford a private practitioner, they can come to us and say, I need help, and we'll part fund it for them.
I think that's incredible, because right now, we're in a bit of a strange political time with regards to hospice, for instance. They're at the moment across the country, across the board, really struggling financially, where that wasn't the case a few years ago. And I know the team that I was working in that went into people's houses in the last 4 weeks of their lives to smooth that journey. their funding got cut. So, our team dissolved. And that's not because they wanted to spend it on on a new chairman or anything. It truly is the state hospices are on their knees. Mm-hmm. So the services that are out there have shrunk, I think, since the last 20 years, have really kind of shrunk for people who are either dying or trying to get past that time of somebody else dying. And a lot of it has gone, the free service has disappeared. And services are still there, but for a lot of people, it's just they have to pay, quite a lot sometimes.
Yeah.
That's the world that we live in. So to have that intervention, I think, is got to be incredibly helpful.
Yeah. No, I hope so.
Sorry, I'm just going to tell you. From my point of view, I looked after my mother for about 8 years, up until the year 2000. She died of multiple sclerosis and various complications, but she was a perfect patient, so no, nothing there. But it's a really weird thing. I can't remember organising the funeral or doing anything for about 2 months of that particular time. And my memory of it is just pretty much gone. I've got a little snips here and there. So I think you're right when you say we all grieve in different ways, because my wife said you were really, really kind of down for a while. And yet I don't remember it at all. Isn't that a strange thing?
Yes, that's sometimes the brain blocks these things out.
Yeah.
And it's a sort of place of trauma. So it's easier to forget about it. It's a bit like, I shouldn't compare it to childbirth, but it's a bit like having childbirth, because I think if you remembered exactly what you went through while you were giving birth, you wouldn't have any more children. I think sometimes it's a bit like that with grief as well. You block it out.
I remember my wife at the time saying, "I'm never doing this again," and then 3 years later, there she was back in the ward. So that's really funny. Yeah, I think that's true. It's true. So that's the organisation. What's it called? Just so people know.
It's Grief Specialists CIC.
And where can they get hold of you? Online or? Online,
so www.griefspecialists.org.
I mean, that's pretty easy to remember, I think. So this whole foray into grief specialism, I mean, it's a strange journey, isn't it? I mean, I never thought 5 years ago that I'd be working for a hospice. It was the last thing on my mind. But then COVID came along, mm-hmm. and I have a business selling cooking oil, and of course, all the restaurants closed. So I was just accidentally thrown into this, having to get a job, and it just happens that as a former nurse, I could get into that. But I am stunned by the lack of knowledge about end-of-life care and post-end-of-life care. Mm. And there's an interesting gap. There's an interesting gap between the time when someone dies and when they're buried, strangely, because there's not a huge amount of support. You get lots of support from a hospice up to that point, but when they have died, there's a gap. And is it a part of that gap where you fill, or is it post that gap, or
it's
the whole?
It's the whole. Before we cover anticipatory grief, so the lead up to that. So when somebody's got a long-term illness, we talk about the losses that you experience with that.
Yeah.
We talk about the death itself, that before and after, and then ongoing.
So that is brilliant. One of the interesting things I'll flag is that as how can I say, as British white people, we are. I don't think that we're very bad about talking about death. I think it's just not on our agenda. It's just like we don't talk about the holiday we might have in 3 years' time. Mm-hmm. We just don't think about it because it's not in sight. So it's only when I think it starts to become in sight, it starts to loom, it starts to go, hang on a minute. Well,
there is an end.
Yeah, there is an end. And a friend of mine, he's just recently been diagnosed with esophageal cancer. And he said, well, they've given me a year, but we just never know, do we? And he's really positive about it. Mm. So it's interesting. I might see if he'll do an interview, because that, as you were talking about, anticipatory grief, for him and for his family, it's going to be quite a journey, I think, because it's pretty starkly in front of him. Although he's a very positive guy, as I say. So what sort of areas do you cover? I don't mean geographically. I mean within the kind of grief tree. You've mentioned a few different people that use different therapists. So what's the overall? I'm probably not giving you the best question here, but what's the overall strategy for your grief therapy? Would you call it? Not grief therapy, really, but alongside somebody's grief journey.
I think for us, it's about opening up conversations about grief, because it's not spoken about generally, and removing that taboo, so that people feel comfortable listening to somebody. And I think listening is such a big part of this. A lot of the time, people just need to be heard, and sometimes it's on repeat. You might hear the same story about somebody's journey of losing somebody on repeat over a period of time. But it's listening and acknowledging and taking away that pain element, so that people don't feel alone in their grief. They know that there are other people out there, one, to help them, two, to listen, and three, who can provide a level of support. Yeah. So I would say that's our sort of overarching purpose.
Okay. I love that. I've got another friend called Martin Rodis, who's got it's his own little company called Elephants in Rooms. Mm-hmm. But he offers training, because as you say, there's not a huge amount of discussion about this. He offers trainings to companies for grief interventionists or grief first aiders, if you like. And I think companies are beginning to understand that they're losing a lot of hours to people who are having unsupported grief. Mm-hmm. And he's really helping to turn that around, which I think, that sounds a bit like what you do, but you could bank of people. Is that right? That
yes,
you
that's right.
For that as well.
Yeah.
So that's definitely, I think, an area where maybe you could explore a bit more. Is it the corporate world? Is that something that you've?
Yes, some of our grief specialists do work with the corporate world and go in and offer training, talks, and support. So a company can pay for them to support one of their employees, for instance. Some of it's through EAPs, which are employee assistance programs. So it's an insurance policy, if you like, that companies take out or employers take out for staff, and staff can opt into their EAP. So there are, there's plenty on offer out there if companies are looking for it. And it's making them aware, first of all, of the impact of a bereavement on a member of staff and the impact that has on their productivity. And, some people want to go back to work. So everybody's different. So there's no right or wrong here. Some people want to go back to work and they throw themselves into work to the point of exhaustion, because that is their distraction behavior. They don't want to think about what they've just been through. So they distract themselves with some people use food, some people use drink, shopping, whatever, and some people work. Other people crumble going back to work and they can't cope. They can't concentrate. They're not productive. They are snappy. Sometimes people get angry.
There's stuff going on within them that they're not really actually aware of themselves.
Yeah. So I'd say there's two types really: the people who go over and above and then burn out, and the people who are distracted, angry, can't cope.
Well, the great thing about burnout is you could write a book about it 20 years later and say,
yes,
that's what people, a lot of celebrities and Tanya, look at what the mistakes I made. Don't do that, and that's lovely,
Yes, that's right. But until you're in that situation, you recognise what you're doing, you don't reach out for help. Whereas if an employer has somebody or people in HR or managers who are trained to recognise this, then they can offer that support. And actually, that's a lot cheaper than replacing somebody and having to recruit somebody and train them up into that job role. So it's just making enough noise that people recognise this state in others. And until, it's not a blanket recognition yet. But there are employers out there who are being trained. Hospices UK has a great programme. Like you said, Martin Rhodes with his work doing Grief First, David Cruz, they are starting to build momentum. There is a level of recognition out there, but there needs to be more.
I think definitely when we've now just got the assisted dying bill,
that's right,
which won't come into effect for a couple of years, I don't think, and it needs a shed load of scrutiny on safeguarding. I think that's true.
Absolutely.
But that's going to throw in a whole new area for people, isn't it? Because I mean, when we think of assisting dying, we kind of think of 1 or 2 people, maybe 5 or 6, but I can imagine that that's going to be not a flood, but there's going to be a lot of people who are going to need a lot of support, especially in the first year of that happening. I think that's something your company is going to be very involved in, aren't they?
I have written about assisted dying? I think I have, and about how it might impact people left behind, because it is a big deal. There might be a guilt element attached to it. Did I do enough to support them? Did they feel supported enough before they made that decision? Have they made that decision because they think I can't support them through their last months of life? There's questions, aren't there? I think if we can help people to prepare for that and how they might be feeling and how to deal with those feelings, then we're doing a good job in my books.
I think definitely you're doing a good job. I've got to say, the team I worked with, it was probably the best. It's a strange thing to say, but one of the best jobs I've ever had. There was a wonderful team of people who were trying to keep relatives and patients emotionally well supported, as well as pain-free and agitation-free, and all that kind of thing. And we saw a huge variety of people who were, a huge variety of situations as well, where some people embraced the end. They were okay with it. They were ready for it, but their family weren't. So it's there was one chap who he had a funeral, so he had a big old party about 3 weeks beforehand. And when I met him, he was just ebullient, showing me all these photos, and we just got on really well, really quickly, as you do in that situation. But his family, they really struggled with that. How can you have a party when you're going to die? And he was a wonderful guy, and he did, and he supported them as much as they were supporting him. So I think, the range that you must come across must be phenomenal of different situations and the reactions that people have.
That's right. Yeah, and I think, looking back, I think if my mum could have had assisted dying, she would have taken it. I remember her distinctly saying, we wouldn't treat the dog like this.
Yeah, I've heard that phrase many times. 4 years, you hear that a lot,
Yeah, and I look, not, deaths aren't what you see on television.
No.
Like somebody peacefully going to sleep. It's not always like that. Like my stepfather's death was quite distressing. He fought it to the end because actually the will to live is really strong. And when somebody's not ready to die, it was awful. And we had the wonderful Macmillan nurses in, and if they could have put a driver in sort of 2 hours beforehand, that would have been perfect. But they were a bit late, and he was very, very distressed, and it was so hard for my family to watch that, and not be able to do anything about it. You're sort of powerless at that point. But once he had his driver and he relaxed, that was okay. And
those syringe drivers are a godsend, aren't they?
Oh, aren't they just? Yeah.
And I have heard it said on occasion well, if you give them that's the sign of the end, isn't it? And I say, no, it's really not. It's just the sign of, if somebody can't eat or drink, you don't want to deny them medication, do you? So you got to have some way of getting that in there, and it can help people to relax. My sister, we had a bit of a bad time last year. My sister died of COPD, and she had it quite bad. And she woke up one day when we were there with the kids, gasping for breath and screaming in pain. But when the nurses, because she got morbid agitation, ripped her mask off, oxygen mask, and the nurses were straight in there, straight on it, and in went the syringe driver, and within 20-25 minutes, I mean, it was quite distressing, but she just settled, and that just really helped her to relax. She died a couple of nights later. But the syringe driver was one of the most important tools that, if you like, the nurses had.
Yes.
And, and she was one also who didn't want to die. She thought she was going to come out of hospital, carry on being an artist. But it wasn't to be. So it is, you're right, when you say some people can just accept it, that's the way. Esther Ranson, for instance.
Yes.
Saying, she wants the choice, and that's quite right. But I do fear for the safeguards. I just think, I think I'm for it, as it were, like probably yourself is.
Just having that choice. Yeah,
absolutely.
It's huge. Giving somebody control over when they go. It's an empowerment, isn't it? And but I think it's quite right to have it signed off by 2 doctors and whatever the process is going to be. So you can't just sort of wake up one day and say, I don't want to live anymore, I'm going to go and die and go and get the meds. It's a bit more complicated than that, and you have to have been diagnosed with 6 months to live, don't you? And
I think one of the interesting things is we've given this to politicians to make the decision on. And some part of me kind of thinks, well, hang on a minute. Shouldn't you be taking the advice of all the people in the industry, people who are there on the front line, rather than my opinion is, how informed is your opinion? But I think they've come to the right decision anyway. It's just now that journey of getting all that in place. And when, of course, they do, your job is going to get a lot more difficult, I think.
Well, that's what we're here for. And I think that's where we start applying for more funding from the government.
Well, this is it. We do need you need more funding. The whole area really needs more attention paying to it, doesn't it? If they can't do more funding, they can find ways of getting funding too. There must be other ways of doing that. Because I'm not going to get too political about it, but I'm pretty sure, during the COVID years, suddenly a spring of money appeared, a slurry of money, if you like, because it was deemed to be important. But so I think it's just priorities, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, listen, it's been a delight talking to you, Maria. And just tell me the name of the company again for people so that they can redirect themselves to you.
Oh, thank you. I'll give you the website. It's www.griefspecialists.org. Lovely.
So, good luck with the following. If I can come back to you maybe in a year or two, and we'll see how your journey how the company's grown, how your journey's grown, and how you're preparing for the oncoming assisted dying bill as well. That would be really cool. All right.
Pleasure. Thank you very much.
No, it's been an absolute pleasure. Okay.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.